church, my church home, and also Bishop. Good to see you back. Here today. God bless. Also, Pastor Dixon, thank you for allowing us, as usual, to come out and give out information to the church family and also to the community, because we know they're out there listening today. So, without further ado, Dr. Webley, I would like you to come out today. And Dr. Webley is here to give us information and facts, and also understand that there are myths out there, what to listen to and what not to listen to. Thank you.
Thank you, Lamont. Thank you. Hey, everybody. It's good to be here again. I see familiar faces, and wherever I see familiar faces, I feel at home. Bishop, it is good to see you, sir. Good to see you. Pastor Dixon, thank you so much. Thank you to each of you for coming out. We're living in interesting times, right? Yesterday morning, I woke up and went to church. In the middle of it, I heard about the attack on Israel. We have so much unrest around the world, and I hope that as people of God, you're seeing this and going back to the book of Matthew and seeing that it's signs of the times. And the most important thing for us is to get ourselves ready, right? To meet our Maker and our God. Because as we look around, pandemics will keep coming. Wars and rumors of wars will keep on coming, right? Governments will impose things that make you cringe. All of these things will just keep piling on. And so we have to now look and ask ourselves, am I right with my Maker and my God? And for those of us who have more years behind us than in front of us, it's probably even more so important that we live each day as if it might be our last, right? That's the only way to live. So I thank God for this place of worship, and thank God for the community members who have come. And as you know, I like to have a conversation, and my slides are really just conversation starters. But let me give you a little bit of an update. Since the last time I was here, the government has stopped updating the COVID dashboards. So the truth is, we really don't have a good number on where we're at. The best I could find is from the Kaiser Family Foundation, where they're showing you the total number of cumulative cases that have been logged. But you know several people in your community have had COVID, and it's not on this log because they just stay home and get better, and then they go back to work. So again, the numbers that you're seeing here are just the lowest of low estimates of what is going on. But I want you to look at that 6.9 million people who have died from COVID and realize that, you know, we want to trivialize this disease, but something killing 6.9 million people is not something simplistic or to be joked about, right? This is a serious disease. And as I told you last time, it's not going anywhere. It's going to continue to be with us as long as we live. Why? Because once you have an infectious disease that has made it into animals, which COVID does, it bounces back and forth from us to animals all the time, it's impossible to get rid of it. Because while you might be able to get humans to get vaccinated and get protected, you have no control over the wild animals. And every time we have a spike of COVID in our community, you go to the deer population and to other animals, and you see the same increase with the same strain in them, right? Because we encroach on their habitats, and we infect them, and they in turn, in Canada, they showed cases where they in turn infected us, right? So we have to now get to the reality that this is something we'll always be living with in one way or another. This is the cases that have been reported in Massachusetts. So over on my left, what you're seeing there is the total number of cases, and then you see number of deaths in Massachusetts. So the good news is that the number of deaths still remain low. You know, so the last date that they took it is right around the week of September 25th, and that was 24 people reported in the state of Massachusetts who died from COVID. If you notice, it's actually on the downturn. And that's what we are also seeing in wastewater testing. And Springfield is now participating in wastewater testing. So we saw a spike at the end of July. All through August, the numbers kept going up, and then now what we're seeing is a drop-off. that also increased hospitalization. And Bay State picked up on that increase in hospitalization, and that's why now, I don't think they've lifted their mask mandate yet. The last time it was there, they required you to wear a mask in the hospital. That's always a good sign to look at. When you have a hospital that as big as Bay State, if they start saying you have to wear masks to come in, it means that they're seeing an increase in the community. And, you know, as regular people, we can look at that and say, okay, when I'm going into a setting that has a lot of people and it's going to be crowded, I probably should also wear a mask, especially if we have underlying conditions. So that's kind of a rule of thumb, and it was heartening to see that they actually did that, and I thought that was wise of them. The interesting thing is the disparities, and that's why speaking with communities like this and speaking with people like you becomes so important. People of color have been disproportionately affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. All of the data that we see now says that. And so what you're seeing here, over on your left, on my left here, you're seeing the total number of COVID cases in different countries in the world. These are excess deaths. In other words, in the years prior to COVID, in 2017, 2018, how many people typically died per year? And that number remained pretty constant. And then COVID came, and that number jumped. And so what they're looking at now, that 1,171 at the top there per 100,000 of the population, is how much it jumped in the United States. And you can see that the number of deaths per 100,000 of the population, that's how they normalize it for it to make sense, because not everybody have 300 million people like the US. So for epidemiologists, what they do, they look at the numbers per 100,000 of a population. And so that means you can compare that with 100,000 of a population anywhere, right? So that's how you normalize the data. So essentially what it is showing is that the United States had the most excess deaths per 100,000 of the population in all of those countries that you're seeing there, right? The US experienced the greatest numbers of COVID-19 deaths of any country in the world. And it's not because we had the most population. It's because of policies and how we politicized an infectious disease and pit one group of people against the other and made it into this huge political hotball that nobody wanted to touch, right? Other countries did not do that. Not even China did that, right? And then I want you to look over on the right-hand side, the numbers there in the orange, and what you're seeing, these are broken down by race, ethnicity in the United States, right? So at the very top there, 3,843 per 100,000 of American Indians and Alaskan Natives. These are the most poverty-stricken groups of people in this country. You know, you hear people talk about how poor certain groups of people in the African-American community is. Go to Appalachian State, right? And see the way the Native American Indians live there. They don't have health care. In fact, if it wasn't for some nurses getting together and getting funding to buy a bus that they can drive up there and give health care to some of these people. Once a year, some of them get a bus that goes up and give them dental care. So when COVID entered their communities, they died in just huge numbers because they lack the basic health care in these regions. And right after that are people who look like most of you, African Americans. So as you see there, what we saw with excess deaths is that we saw 4 to 5 times the amount of excess deaths in the African American population as we have in the Caucasian population in this country. And that should tell you something. The other thing that is clear, and I don't have it here on a graph, is that people who live in lower socioeconomic conditions, the people who are paid the lowest, the people who live in the most impoverished communities, died disproportionately, whatever your race or ethnicity, right? And so this is not unique to COVID. Any infectious disease that you see that we have in this country, whether it's a sexually transmitted disease, an infectious disease like this, HIV, it disproportionately affects people of color, people in low socioeconomic conditions, more than any other group of people. So the other thing is, we're looking, and the last time I was here, I spent a lot of time talking about long COVID. People who have gotten infected with the virus, And 6 months after, sometimes 7, 8, 9 months after, you're still having effects of it. I have friends who have been infected 3 or 4 times by COVID, even though they've been vaccinated, because they have underlying conditions that make them not produce the type of response that you would typically get from the virus. And many of them were healthy people before, and they can barely climb a few stairs, right? And some people have heart conditions that they didn't know they had before. There are people who newly developed diabetes, who never had diabetes before. And until COVID, we didn't even realize that our pancreas has a specific number of cells that we're born with. We don't produce any more of them. That makes insulin. Turns out that this virus actually infects those very cells that make insulin. And when it infects them, it kills them. And after it has killed a certain number of them to a certain threshold, then you can't make enough insulin to metabolize the glucose that you're taking in. So you have type 2 diabetes, right? COVID can and does cause diabetes because it decreases the number of cells that are producing the insulin. Insulin is what you use to control the sugar that you're taking. And so if you're eating a piece of bread, that's broken down in your body into sugar, right? Anything that's starchy that you eat turn into sugar. That sugar has to be metabolized and stored, and the only way you do that is through insulin. That's why insulin is produced, and that's why when you have diabetes, you get an insulin injection, because your body's not producing it, right? And when they give you that insulin, that's how you manage your sugar. And so you monitor that sugar to make sure it doesn't go over a certain level, because if it does, you could just pass out, right? It's a dangerous thing. It destroys your kidney, destroys your vision, makes you predisposed to infections, because that extra sugar is just food for bacteria and viruses that are floating around. That sugar that's in the blood that's not being taken up by the cells is just inviting an infectious microbe in to utilize it, right? And it does several other things. So that is the issue. So what we're looking at there is the percentage of people, male and female, females in blue. So we have more females than males having long COVID. Not sure why. There seems, it could be a hormonal difference. Nobody has figured that out yet. But what it is saying is that there's still people living in our community who have the effects, anywhere from 5 to 7% of them having long-term effects from COVID, from being infected. Okay. So now that we know that, over the time that we haven't seen each other, this virus hasn't just been sitting around. It has been mutating. It has been evolving. And when you look at the way this virus has been doing it, it's pretty remarkable. So in 2019, we had what we call the original Wuhan strain of the virus. That's a virus that we first saw in China in November, December of 2019. Just around September of 2020, we started seeing variants of it. It means that it was mutating, and these mutations were making viruses that were strong enough to go off on their own. It's offspring, right? And that's what you're seeing here. So you have from, after a while, they just couldn't keep track of them, so they use these Greek letters, which we're used to in science, to designate what they are. Now, the only letters that you're seeing up there are the ones that became something big. We call them variants of concern, right? There are hundreds of thousands and millions of other variants that never made it up on any list there because they didn't become of great concern. In other words, they didn't turn out to be worse than their parent, right? And as a result of them, that we just ignored them. It doesn't mean that they're not floating around and causing infections and death. It's just that they're not worse than their parents, right? Is that making sense to you? Okay, so we are up now, and everything was being managed pretty well. The vaccines were working. People were okay. And then Omicron came. You remember? In September last year when Omicron just came and just devastated everything. And over the last year, from November or thereabouts of 2021 until now, the strains that we've been dealing with are offsprings of Omicron, right? We haven't gotten a new variant coming from the parent strain, but Omicron and its offsprings are what we've been dealing with, okay? And so this little tree is like ancestry.com for viruses, right? If you've ever done an ancestry and you get your DNA sequenced, right, and it tells you which family members, sometimes for those of you who have, people who have done it, you realize right away somebody sends you an email or contacts you on Facebook and say, hey, I see on Ancestry that I'm related to you, right? That's how this is. The parent there is the WA1 strain, right? That's the original parent of these viruses. That's what came about in 2019 from China. After that, you start seeing the alpha and the beta and the delta, and then you get to Omicron. But the thing that you notice is all of them originated from the original Wuhan strain. Alpha came from the original strain. Beta came from the original strain. Delta came from the original strain. Gamma came from the original strain, and so on and so forth. Kappa, Delta. And so once we got to Omicron, Omicron also came from the original strain. But then it started having variants of concern on its branches. So you see Omicron there, and you start seeing BA1, BA2, BA3, BA4, BA5. And BA1 and BA3 didn't really turn out to be anything great. But 4 and 5 and 2 really made their mark. They started expanding and changing. And that is what we're dealing with now. It turns out that they're so different from even the original strains that we got vaccinated against. And the new vaccines, the bivalent vaccines that we had, that were really your Delta and your original Wuhan strain, the new variants are so different that they're able to evade part of the response, the protection that those vaccines gave us. Does that make sense? Because they're just so different. And so what we have now is that you look up there and these Omicrons, they're so distantly related from the original viruses and all the other variants that we have down there in blue that people are starting saying, these look so different, they could very well be a completely different virus, right? Even though they're not, they're still family members. And so what you're seeing there is a little plot of all the different Omicron strains. All of those little circles, every color that you're seeing there represents a different sub-variant of Omicron, right? That is not currently circulated. In fact, those ones are so closely related to each other and distantly related from others that we're seeing around. And you're seeing different percentages of them. And just to make you see just how many of them are circulating, all of what you're seeing here is just one branch of that sub-branch, right? This is in the last couple of weeks. This is September 18th data. Every single one that you see there is what we call the XBB variant of the Omicron subvariant of COVID. In other words, the Wuhan strain has made a great-grandchild that is spawning offsprings that are so dangerous and are so different, we need a vaccine against that. So the updated vaccines are made against that XBB branch. And if you notice, the nomenclature is crazy because you're seeing XBB.1, 0.1.5, and it means that we're seeing different variants of that variant. Why is this so different? Because the spike protein of the virus that I'm going to get to is actually what the virus uses to unlock our cells to get in. And all the other variants that we saw before, all of the alpha, delta, and stuff, they had a few mutations in the spike protein that made them different enough that they could take off and do their own thing. For Omicron and for this XBB, it has over 30 mutations in that protein. Changed it dramatically so that when you look, what you're seeing is just something very different, and then you have this EG.5 that's just taking up the place. So what you're seeing now, they're showing you hospitalizations and then the different strains of the virus that led to that little spike in hospitalizations that we saw starting over the end of the summer into what we're seeing now. The good news is that the model is showing that it's on a downturn. The bad news is that we saw a new spin-off from this XBB that you're seeing there, that's the FL PS. Flip the amino acid, that's what that stands for, not really relevant here. But it is going up. And we are not seeing a lot of cases of it in the United States yet, but at the same time, we're not really testing and sequencing at the rate that we were a year ago. So that's, for outlook, that's one that I'm keeping an eye on. But for now, the vaccines that were renewed, that's why they went in and decided that we have to update the vaccines. And because of the time that we're in, right? In 2021, when we had our outbreak, we had schools closed, people were wearing masks, all of these things. So when you think about an infection, you have to think about the two sides of it. The human behavior side and the virus behavior side. I just spent time showing you how the virus has changed, right? We've also changed, right? In 2020, 2021, schools were closed because we just didn't know how to handle it, and we gave ourselves a little bit of time by closing down stuff and giving us time to catch up because we didn't have vaccines. Now we have vaccines, right? And even the original Wuhan strain of the vaccine still works against all variants of the virus, just not as effectively, right? And so that is good, but the virus is also changing because now we have flu and RSV and maybe even cold viruses that we know are seasonal and have started increasing now as the fall comes on. And here's the problem. By looking at somebody or hearing the symptoms, you can't tell which one you have. If I see you coughing or see you sniffling, I don't know if you have an allergy, if you have COVID, if you have the flu, if you have RSV, or something else, right? And even the most well-trained physicians are not able to tell unless you test for it, right? There are only a few things. Of course, if you're losing smell and taste, then you know it's COVID, right? None of the others do that. If you're having aches and pains all over, that probably is the flu, because COVID doesn't do that, right? So you have a few things, but those are on the much more severe side of it, right? But you could have something really mild and think I probably just have the cold. You probably have COVID, right? The problem is that we don't have the free test kits as ubiquitously as we used to. I know that Bud Williams and Lamont and the Mocha group, they're trying to get those test kits out and so that people can test themselves. But sooner or later, you're going to show up at church and people are sniffling and sneezing. And what is that? I mean, some people will stay home, but some people will just show up still. Why? Because we've been vaccinated. Those who haven't been vaccinated have been infected. And the COVID symptoms are probably not as severe. So you don't even know that things are that bad until you transmit it to somebody who doesn't have your level of protection. And that now could get pretty serious. That person could end up in the hospital. So these behaviors now, and so what we know is that before COVID, people have always said that the ventilation systems that we have in our buildings are not well thought out. You need at least 3 full air exchanges per hour to actually protect you from stuff that's in the air. And this could be pollutants, allergens, or viruses. But most buildings are not set up for that, right? And so some of the COVID money that came out should have been used to improve ventilation. In schools, churches could have gotten some of that money too, so that you could look and say, okay, we're gonna have an air exchange system in this sanctuary that's giving us that level of exchange over that 1 hour period. Because we know that when you do that, it thins the amount of viral particles in the air. It significantly reduces them. So your probability of getting infected is significantly reduced, right? So that's where we are. And so I showed you these images of this virus as a cartoon. That's not really how the virus looks, but it's a pretty good cartoon. And so it shows you those red things on the outer surface. That's the spike proteins, right? Those are vital to the virus. Each viral particle has about 70 to 100 of those and on the surface, and that's what it uses to attach to what we call the ACE2 receptor on the cells that are susceptible. If a cell doesn't have that ACE2 receptor, it can't get infected with COVID. right? But lots of cells do, right? And so those spike proteins are actually what your body make antibodies against, these Y-shaped proteins that bind to it and neutralize it. In other words, it's like taking duct tape and just taping it over it, and so it can't attach to the cell to get in, right? That's what our bodies do. Now imagine then that's what, so that little green Y-shaped thing, that's how we depict an antibody in immunology class. And that thing there is the virus, and the antibody is binding to it, and once the antibody binds to it, it gums up that receptor, right? It's like somebody come and breaks a key in your door lock. You can't open it, right? So the virus is not able to get in. So that's how that works. Now I want you to imagine then that you have tons of those binding to other sites on the spike protein, because to us, the spike protein is this sub-microscopic tiny thing. To the immune system, it's a 20-story building, right? It's huge because the body makes proteins, protective proteins, against every 10 or 15 amino acids. And this thing has tens of thousands of them, right? So you can imagine then that the body is making kind of a wholesale response to it. And up there where you see it says RBD, the RBD there means receptor binding domain. It means that is actually where the spike protein makes contact with the host cell receptor. That's the business end of it. That's the key going in the lock. And what it's showing you there with that little arrow is that when you have an antibody that binds to that area of the spike protein, it can't make that lock. It can't get in, right? That's what your vaccines do. Now imagine a virus then having 30 different mutations, some of them in that RBD. So it means that sometimes it binds and is able to block the virus from getting in, and sometimes not. So that is why you need an updated vaccine, that the body now has antibodies against all of those residues in the RBD. And all of those parts of it, it recognizes, says having all of those antibodies binding at the same time. And that now is able to prevent infection or significantly lower the intensity of the infection. So the way I want to depict it is, let's say that that building there is the spike protein of the virus, of the original virus, whatever original strain that is. That's what the body sees, that's what it recognizes. It knows the front door, it recognizes the pattern of the building. It sees every window, every ledge, the flagpoles that you see there on the front, they're recognizable by some protein of the body. Talk about fearfully and wonderfully made. And this is true for every single microbe that your body encounters. It has this amazing, almost unlimited repertoire of making protective responses and then having a memory of that. It creates memory cells, right? So people who want you to think that somehow you just evolved haven't really thought about this stuff, you know? As a scientist, when I started studying immunology 30-something years ago, I had just gotten baptized and gotten into the church, and it strengthened my faith to be doing this type of science. Because the more I dug into it, the more I realized none of this is by chance. This is so well orchestrated and thought out that there is no other way it could function. And for a long time, we didn't even know how it worked, right? Until now, we understand the genetics of how it works, and that's even more mind-blowing, right? The way the genetics of that works to make sure that we have this. Now, since that image has been in your mind now, that's what it is in the immune system. The immune system takes that in, and it says, I know this thing. When I see it again, I recognize, I have it in my database. And then comes Omicron and the XBB strain, and this is what you have, right? So there's some parts of the building that are still recognizable. And those antibodies that were made against that part of the building still work. That is why the original vaccine that you get still has some efficacy against this XBB strain of Omicron, but only that little side. Everything else, this whole side of the building has changed. 30 mutations is a big change, right? So this virus is going to be more evasive. The immune system is there thinking, have I seen you before? You look familiar. I know I'm getting old, but I think I know you. While this virus is just replicating its way through, realizing that it's not fully recognized, and it gives it a chance to replicate. Moreover, if you're a person who's immunosuppressed for whatever reason, your immune system is there thinking, I think I know you. I'm a little tired. Maybe when I wake up tomorrow, I'll look at you again, but I think I recognize you. And it gives the virus time. And as a result of that, by the time your immune system catches on, which it will, for some of us, it's too late. We're in the hospital or worse. However, when you now take this blueprint and you show it to the immune system in a vaccine, the immune system is not confused anymore. Because when it sees this, for it, this is a new virus. I'm making a response against this whole side that I haven't seen before. And you now have protection against that. That is what the updated vaccines are, right? It's just really catching up. I mean, how many of you have cell phones? Let me see your hands. You have a cell phone. When was the last time you had something that says update? Probably this morning, depending on which app you have, right? What does it tell you that that update is doing? Fixing bugs? That's right, right? Updating security, right? It's the same thing, right? The anti-vaxxers want you to believe that, oh, this thing didn't work. Did your cell phone work before the update? Of course it did. You know, it worked. You were able to do the stuff that you needed to do, but the software people know that there were vulnerabilities because somebody hacked it, right? Somebody hacked it and they realized that, oh, this is hackable, we need to fix that. It's an ongoing thing. You create something that you think is all perfect. If it was perfect, you wouldn't have software 15 point something for your Apple iPhone, right? Right? If it was perfect, now it's 17, right? 16, 17 for the new phone, right? And they are the best at what they do. The immune system is even better, right? And it knows when something new has come in. But as I showed you before, it takes 2 weeks before the immune system is able to build that type of response that's going to be protective. That's what they tell you. When you get your vaccine, it's going to be 2 weeks before you have full protection from it. It's not that the immune system doesn't know it's there. It's that your normal cells are not going to replicate more than once a day. If your cells start replicating more than once a day, you know what you have? Cancer. Because cancer cells grow out of control. Normal cells don't. They make sure that they have enough growth factors, they're getting all the signals that they need, they're the right size, they're getting the right signal to tell them to grow. They're not going to do it without that. So it takes a little while to build up what we call a clonal expansion of your cells until you get the cells that recognize these new parts. That's 2 weeks. You know how long it takes COVID to send in the hospital? 7 to 8 days. Don't have enough time. So that's why you get vaccinated, right? Okay, a few more things. So here is just a little cartoon of that. There's SARS-CoV-2, that's the virus that causes COVID. Those little things on it, Lego blocks, the kids can understand this, right? That's the spike protein. They have a certain shape, they have a certain size, right? So there they are. They lock into the cell, right? That's a cell at the bottom, human cell, right? That's the ACE2 receptor that you see there, and you lock in your Lego blocks. When the body sees that, it makes antibodies against. That's what those green things are. You see how they cover it? Now your Lego blocks can't click in. You're not building anything, right? The virus can't get in, right? But then, over time, you have a mutation. You see the change in the shape? You've moved from a square to a rectangle now, right? Right? And guess what? Sometimes, depending on the blocks, it even locks better into the next Lego block, right? So sometimes the mutation makes the virus fit better with the cell. So that's how you get a strain that's more transmissible, right? And more deadly, because it's able to do that. It's able to lock more tightly. And then you come now with your antibodies. Can they fit? No, because the square can't fit with your rectangle, right? So what you really need is an updated vaccine that's able to do that. And right now, all of the updated vaccines have this XBB 1.5 strain in it, right? That's the spike protein that they use to make that. It's not a big change in the vaccine. It's really just an update, just a software update, right, of the original vaccines that we had that shows it those spaces in both Moderna, Pfizer, and Novavax. Novavax is the protein vaccine, right? So the others are mRNA vaccines that have been controversial. People think it's gene therapy. People think it's all sorts of things. Your Novavax vaccine is similar to any other a vaccine that you've had before mRNA vaccines come. It's a protein that's made in a lab, put in a package, and then given to you. You could literally just put in your refrigerator and it's good. For the mRNA vaccines, you have to have pretty cold temperature to store them. Right, so that's also available. Right? The difference is the Novavax vaccine is for people 12 years and up. It's not approved for the 6 months and older that the mRNA vaccines are approved for. So that's the difference. If you have a younger child, they will have to get one of the mRNA updates. This new vaccine update replaces the bivalent vaccines that came before. So if you didn't get the bivalent vaccines, you don't need to get those. You can just go now and get this new vaccine booster that they have, right? So people have said that in different countries, they're recommending the vaccine for different people. So if you look in the UK, it's only for people older than 65 years old, and for Australia, for those who are 75 years and older. That's where they recommend, those are the people they recommend to get the vaccine. The US, they say everybody 6 months and older should get it. Why the difference? Anybody know? Because we have a crappy healthcare system, right? As a people, we are, in fact, when you look at the 11 most high-income countries in the world, the US falls dead last in terms of its ability to have comparative healthcare scores, right? The US healthcare system is a mess. The big difference is if you go to Norway and the Netherlands and Australia and the UK and Germany, doctors actually run the healthcare system. In the US, who runs the healthcare system? Insurance companies, right? Your doctor goes to medical school for 4 years, then do residency for another 3 or 4 years, depending on their specialty, then do fellowship for another 2 or 3 years, depending on their specialty. And then they go to work for a healthcare system where some guy sitting behind a computer running algorithms tell them whether or not you should be treated and which procedures you're likely to get. And because of that, our emergency rooms are always full. Our healthcare system is a mess. And so in Australia or in the UK, if you get sick with RSV or COVID or something, you can easily get access to care. In the United States, if the same thing happened to you, you probably die before you get care. So there's no equivalence there. If we had a good healthcare system, then we could say, unless you're immunosuppressed, you don't need this vaccine. However, if we even have a tiny bump and people start getting infected, it's going to overwhelm our healthcare system because we don't have capacity, right? Our hospital beds are constantly full because people are not getting the level of care. You go to most of these other high-income countries, you don't see that. Their hospital rooms are empty because people can go in and get care when you need, right? You don't have to wait 3 months to get an operation for a tumor that's growing. You know, it's ridiculous. That doesn't happen anywhere else. So that's the difference if somebody asks. So here are some important notes that I want to go through with you about the new COVID vaccine. This is important. So right now, for these COVID vaccines, private insurance companies are mandated to cover your vaccine, right? So whatever private insurance you have, when you go and get these vaccines, they should cover it. And one of the delays in having these vaccines in CVS and Walgreens is that these insurance companies hadn't yet done their agreements, right? So the vaccines were made, they were shipped. But up until last week, Lamont, we couldn't get them. You go all around Springfield here and you ask, they make an appointment, but when you show up for the appointment, you don't get a vaccine, right? Because they haven't yet worked out their agreements, and because of the way insurance works in this country, CVS and Walgreens was fearful that they probably wouldn't get their money, so they won't give you the vaccine. I think most of those bugs have been worked out now, so you can get your vaccines now, but they can't turn you away, right? The only thing is that if you go out of network, They might not cover it. So depending on the type of insurance you have to stay within network. For some of us, our network is in the immediate area where you live. If you have a better insurance, it's the whole New England, right? Depending on your insurance specifically. So you want to make sure that you're in network. If you go there and they say, oh, you have to pay because you're on a network, just don't get it. Go somewhere else where you're in network. Because the vaccines are now pricey, right? The last time I talked with you, the government was covering all the costs for your COVID vaccines. And they were cheap. Now, these vaccine companies that our taxpayer dollars help them to develop is now costing us $200-300 a piece, right? They have blown the prices up. And that's you can't even blame them if they can get away with that. Now for the uninsured people, for people who are uninsured or underinsured, you should not be turned away from any of these pharmacies to get your vaccines. Why? Because of this program called the Bridge Program, right? The Bridge Program says that you still have to get vaccinated if you're uninsured or underinsured. And that ensures that everybody should be able to get vaccinated. For children, children are covered by a completely different vaccine mandate. And so this is one of those vaccines. So all children would still have to get vaccinated regardless of insurance, right? Because the childhood vaccination program covers that, right? The other thing is you can now go to covidtest.com and you can get free COVID test kits mailed to your home, right? Remember when you were able to do that? As of last week, right, as of October 2, you can do that again. So just go on that site, put in your address, and it will come by UPS in a week or so that you can test. So just in case you start having some symptoms, you're wondering, what is it? You can test. Unfortunately, this is not renewable. Before, they used to give you 4 per month. They're just giving you 4 now. That's it, right? So these are the differences here where vaccination is concerned. But the good news is that everybody should be able to get vaccinated. As I said, children should be able to get those vaccines through their childhood vaccine program. And so they shouldn't be turned away. And so there's also the influenza vaccine. And people say, should I get the flu shot and the COVID shot at the same time? I know CVS is pushing this. And they have data. They have run this and shown that it's safe, right? That when they combine them in the same shot, it's not in the same shot. You get 2 injections, 2 different vaccines, right? But you can get those 2 at the same time. Now, the COVID vaccines are what I say are immunologically reactogenic. In other words, they give you more symptoms than probably any vaccine you've ever taken. Because they're just different. They cause your body to produce proteins, and those proteins are what you're getting immunized against. So it really revs your immune system up. You know, it's like taking a new Porsche engine and put in your old VW bug. It's going to shake that chassis like crazy, right, when you rev that engine. That's essentially what is happening, right? And so you have to decide if you want to do that. I'm not going to do that. Because when I get the COVID shot, it really drives my immune system into overdrive. I am like, for half a day, I'm having fever or chills for the update. So, and when I get the flu shot, which I do every year, it hurts my arm. So I will give myself a little space in between those. But that's my personal preference, right? And so you should decide, along with talking with your doctor, if you can get a hold of them, about what is best for you, right? I'm sorry for the skepticism. So at the same time, there is an RSV vaccine out there. The problem is, not all insurance companies cover it. But for people, especially people 65 and older, RSV can be a deadly virus. Of course, you know the flu by itself is a very deadly virus, right? So I advise people to get the flu shot. You never know how bad a flu season is going to be, right? So I'm always facing lots of students, and so I constantly make sure that I get my flu shot. For years, I didn't get it, but then I would be sick all the time, you know, because students come into a large room, they're sniffling, they're sneezing, you're going to get it. If you're a school teacher, if you're somebody who is in the midst of a lot of people, this flu season, and this month is the best month to get vaccinated. Because the flu shot wanes, but the flu season doesn't last that long, right? By next April or so, it's pretty much over. So if you get the flu shot this month, it's really going to protect you for the rest of the season. And the data is showing that this flu shot is actually working pretty well, right? Many times we're off, but this time we're on. So the other thing that we've seen is that they just approved an RSV vaccine for pregnant women. And as a mom who's pregnant, you might not need that protection, but your baby does. And when you get vaccinated, it protects your baby, right? The same thing with the COVID shot. The data shows that the COVID shot really does protect women and their babies. I mean, it gives significant protection to your baby until that 6 months that they can get vaccinated. Remember, your baby can't get vaccinated at birth for COVID. It takes 6 months before they can get their shot. And in that 6-month period, especially if you're breastfeeding, you pass antibodies through the breast milk to your baby, right? They get some through the placenta while you're pregnant, but as you're breastfeeding, they get additional protection because you have seen the virus and you're protected. So if you have relatives who are pregnant and want that sort of protection, the data looks really good. So again, you remember what I was telling you. You don't know what you have. Look at the symptoms for RSV, flu, and COVID, right? You see how many similarities you have there? Some of the more common ones is true across all of them, right? And if you're trying to work out that jigsaw puzzle, good luck with that, right? The best thing to do is just to get a test. The thing is that for some of you, you had those old COVID tests, and you might think that they're expired. Some of them are not. So when you go on that COVID test site for CDC, they'll have a link right there that you can check the lot number on any ones that you have. And you can check to see if those are still good. And Lamont knows that my rule of thumb is if the gel that the swab is in is not dried out, it's still going to work, right? If it's dried out, throw it out, right? Because you need that gel, you know, that liquid to put it in. If that liquid is dried out, get rid of it. If that liquid is not dried out, it's probably working still fine. You have to put an expiration date on these things, but over time, if you notice, they've extended the expiration date. It's nearly 2 years now. What that says is that, you know, because it's just a card that they have in the test strip, right, in that laminar flow test kit, nothing is happening to it. You mobilize proteins there, they're not really going anywhere, right? So it should still work fine. Again, the flu symptoms there, you know, flu is really serious, and if you have underlying conditions, again, that could be problematic. I think I'm going to almost wrap up here. For flu, these are the things that are there for treatment. So there are treatments for the flu, right? Tamiflu works pretty well for most people, unless you have some condition that prevents you from getting that. So there's some options there for flu treatment outside of the vaccine. So if you decide for whatever reason that you're not getting the flu shot, then there are options if you actually get the flu and get really sick. So don't sit at home with it. If you start feeling achy all over, that probably is the flu, and you probably want to go see your doctor, especially if you're older, okay? And I'll skip through this a little bit. These are strains of the flu. RSV can be deadly. These are some of the things that RSV does. You know, it can cause heart problems, kidney problems, liver problems, neurological issues, blood issues, diabetic issues. These are underlying conditions that make RSV worse. And I know that most people haven't heard about respiratory syncytial virus until recently, but it's always been around, right? It's always been a problem for people with asthma and other types of conditions. So you want to be thoughtful about it. The data there for 2019, I think it was, said that over 100,000 deaths worldwide from RSV. It's not an insignificant amount of people losing their lives to a virus that we see as not a big deal. Right, so they have the vaccines there for RSV. You can see them there. Those are available, and as I said, there's now an RSV vaccine that just 2 weeks ago got approved for women who are pregnant. And that's where I'm going to stop, and I'll take some questions if you have any. Yeah. Excellent question. Yes, it does. Excellent, excellent question. So the old COVID test still works for this virus because the test is looking for specific proteins that are there. Yeah. Lamont?
Yeah, I just want to emphasize on the COVID test. We brought some in today, and they were from 2023 and also 22, but the COVID tests are perfectly great because we opened them up, and what they're doing at the health department, and we also, what we have done, we've took them out the box. So if you look at the box, it'll give you an old date. You take them out the package, you look at that lot number, you will see there's a different date that tells you when it may expire, and it was going to give you another 6 months to almost a year of usage. So please grab some when you leave out today. I brought plenty.
Very nice. You have a question? Any other questions? RSV? Yeah.
Yes, RSV. What are the symptoms or that people may be looking for to get that vaccination? How is it much different than getting the flu shot, and how is it much different than getting the COVID shot?
Yeah, you don't want to wait until you get the symptoms to get the vaccine. That will be too late. You just have to assess your risk based on these things that I said, right? So assess your risk. That if you're over age 60, you're probably at high risk for RSV. If you have any of these other conditions, if you have any of these chronic conditions that I have there, including having an immune system that is immunosuppressed because you've had an organ transplant, or because you're on some drug that's suppressing your immune system, because you've had cancer and you got chemotherapy recently, all of those things significantly reduces your immune output. And so that might be an indication that RSV might be a vaccine you want to consider. But certainly talk to your doctor about it, what your risks might be. Because not everybody who is over 60 is at very high risk for this. There are a lot of people over 60 who are very healthy, so yeah. Yeah, that could be anything. That could literally be that you ate a bad burger. You know, so it's very hard to tell what that is. But my advice always is go to your doctor. One of the challenges for us is that we take way too long to go to the doctor. We have this wait and see, you know, that our great-grandparents used to have. But if you have access to health care, and if you have, which it has its own challenges, and I know that for some people, the thought of going and waiting in the emergency room is not inviting. But if there's a clinic, right? If there's a neighborhood clinic that you can go to and see a nurse or a nurse practitioner, they can pretty readily oftentimes tell you what's going on. And oftentimes they have quick tests there that they can test for more than one thing in a relatively short period of time and at least rule some stuff out. You know, at least rule out some abdominal thing. Because what you just talked about there almost sounds, it could be norovirus, which you could get from foods, right? It could be salmonella. It could be shigella, which you could also get from foods. And foods, by the way, are the most common things that we get infected from. Look how many times we eat per day. Every single time you eat, you're introducing microbes into your system, right? And many times your immune system just takes care of it, but sometimes it's more than it's able to take care of right away, so you get sick, right? And you're eventually going to bounce back, but again, as we get older, we're not able to bounce back as quickly. But to your point, I understand what you're asking, that could it be one of these respiratory viruses? Absolutely. And so if you have a COVID test, I would do a COVID test, right? Because COVID can cause diarrhea, and has, over and over, right? And so do a COVID test. If you rule that out and it's not a COVID positivity, I would do that test the next day. And when I do the swab, I will do the throat and then the nostrils, especially if your throat is feeling a little scratchy, right? Because oftentimes when you do just the nostrils, you don't have enough viruses in your nostrils to give you a positive. But the virus also lives in your throat, right? And sometimes your sinuses drain it to the back of your throat and reinfect the cells there. So you take the same swab, you do your throat first, because I don't know anybody want to do your nose and then your throat. You're probably going to gag on that. So you do your throat first, And then take that same swab that you just did your throat and do your nostrils in the way the box explains that you should do. Then do the test on that. You'll be amazed at how many times that combination turns up positive when your nostrils turn up negative. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. About 2.5 years ago, data started coming out that was a better test. Unfortunately, CDC hasn't really updated that and made it a front and center point on their site. So a lot of people are still just doing the swab and saying I'm negative. And then 2 days later, they're very symptomatic and very much positive in the nostrils. But by that time, you infected several people, right? Because COVID, you can infect people without having any symptoms. One of the few viruses that does that. And that's the other thing. If you have the flu, you're going to know you do. And until you start having symptoms, you're not going to be infectious to anybody. Right? Same thing with RSV, same thing with the common cold. Not so with COVID, right? You could have 0 symptoms that are overt and still be able to transmit COVID. You can't do that for any of the other ones that we just talked about, right? You need to have those symptoms to have enough viruses. Yeah, I mean, what I would say is if you're older than 60 and you're going to an event that's going to have a lot of people, and in the community, so it's not in vacuum, look in the community and see what's the numbers in the community. The higher the numbers are in the community, it's more likely it is that somebody at that event is going to have it, right? And so what you do is wear a mask while you're inside, you know? And then if you come back, you don't have to do a COVID test after you come back, because if you're not showing any symptoms, you probably don't have it, or it probably won't even come up positive. But if you start feeling some sort of symptom, then I would do a test then. But on the other hand, if you know that you're going to go to and see a group of people or somebody who's really vulnerable, you know, because they're in a nursing home or somewhere else, maybe they've just been recovering from a surgery or something like that, then I'd probably do a COVID test just to be safe, right? Especially if I think I was exposed. But I would just take it in strides. You know, it's not a random thing. There is always the possibility that you can get infected, but then there's a probability. Probability is different from possibility, right? It's always possible to get infected. The question is, what's the probability that you're going to? So I'm in this sanctuary and I'm not wearing a mask, and the reason for that is that I calculated the risk. Right? I calculate the risk of the total number of people here and the number of cases that we're seeing in the city, right? Which I know are very low. So the probability that there's somebody in here with less than 200 people who have COVID is very low. Now the possibility is that there could be somebody who has COVID. The probability is pretty low. So I'm going with that probability. So it's always a calculation that you make. You know, you're leaving to go somewhere and you're going to have to be on the mass spike. In the evening, you decide, okay, do I leave 20 minutes earlier or not? You know, it's the probability that you're going to have a traffic buildup at a certain spot. If you have to pass the 84 split connector there, that you're going to have more traffic there. So you accommodate that in your planning. And that's essentially what my advice is. Yes, babe.
When I had COVID, I had to go to Noble Hospital for 3 days. I did the remdesivir drip. Is remdesivir still effective? And well, that was the second part of it. Are they still doing it?
Yeah. It turns out that remdesivir, people are now running away from it. Yeah, I mean, it worked with the original variants. With Omicron, not so much. And then the data, there's new data now coming in showing that it actually puts some pressure on the virus to mutate. And so we're seeing new mutations coming now that when we look at the genetic sequence, we're certain that it's because of the presence of remdesivir. Why that happened. No, you're good. Because of course, it only happens in people whose COVID went for a long time. And And you see what I showed you with this new Omicron XBB variant that's so bad? All of that happened in one person from what the data is showing us. Which means that somebody who was significantly immunosuppressed got infected with the virus and couldn't fight it. And the virus just stayed there and did mutation after mutation after mutation until it got 30 of them before it escaped and infected somebody new. So if you're immunosuppressed for whatever reason and you haven't been vaccinated, you have no protection. And when the virus gets in you, there's a higher probability of that type of mutation. And then when you add on to it now some other pressure, it's the same thing you get antibiotic resistance. The easiest way you get antibiotic resistance is not to complete your full course of antibiotics, because what you have is a sublethal dose in your system. So when the doctor says you need to take this 5 days and you start feeling better after 2 days, and by day 3 you don't take it anymore, what the microbes are doing, they're just doing a happy dance, right? Because some of them did die, but the ones that didn't die figured out how to overcome that antibiotic based on the sublethal dose that they had. They got a good look at it, and now they're prepared for it. So the next time you get sick and you take that antibiotic, if you got that strain again, it won't have any effect, right? So that's how the remdesivir thing worked, right? So right now, it turns out that we don't have a good monoclonal antibody that works. We don't have good supportive therapy, and that's why we're saying get vaccinated. Because they're going to develop new therapies. They're constantly doing it, but there's none on the market right now that's very effective. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, so Paxlovid probably is better, right, because it was developed in a different way. It has a couple of drugs in it, and so they're still using that, but only if they have to, right? So with people getting less and less sick, there's no reason to use it often unless, of course, that person is really in a bad way. Well, I mean, doctors have discretion, right? They look at the patient and they say, okay, is this something you're going to overcome without extra help? And in other words, if you come in, you haven't been vaccinated, you probably never had COVID before, they're going to do it, because that means that you're probably in a worse space overall, right? Yeah. Yeah, so it's not that black people or people of color are more susceptible to the virus. It's because of the type of work we do and where we find ourselves. Many people of color work in jobs where we're people-facing and it's considered essential. So while other people can take the day off and take the time off and stay home and recover, you're going to work partially sick, because you're afraid that you'll lose your job if you don't show up. And that's mainly because of the type of work you're doing. You know, so essentially you found, for example, people who work on the buses, you know, on subway cars, people who are serving in supermarkets and these other types of jobs. It's overwhelmingly people in the lower to middle, lower socioeconomic class. And that's why we're faced with that. Overall as well, we don't carry as good a healthcare coverage as other parts of the population, which means that we probably have underlying conditions that are not being taken care of properly, right? So it's a combination of things. And oftentimes, we kind of leave out the psychological part of it, where every day, you're probably experiencing microaggressions. You know what that is? People are discriminating against you, not overtly, but the little things that they say. The little things that put a pit in your stomach, but you don't answer. The little things that tick you off, but you don't say anything. You go home and you embody that. Moreover, you are the primary breadwinner for your family. You're carrying 2 jobs just in order to make ends meet, which means that you're not resting as much as you should. overall, when you pile all of that together, it has an effect on your health. It makes you less likely to ward off things that come at you. And so when you encounter them, you're worse off for many, many reasons, lots of them that cannot really be fully quantified. Yeah, it goes back to what I said before, our broken healthcare system in this country. And if our government go ahead and prioritize, two things might happen. Right? Two things might happen. Number one, as a black man, you might say, well, the government is saying we're getting this thing first. I'm probably not going to take it. Because why? They've never prioritized us, right? So why would they do it now? So that's number one. But number two, they would also have to admit what they've done to you over the past 200 years. We would have to admit the racial, historical subjugation of a whole race of people that has happened in this country. Nobody has the appetite for that anymore, apparently, right? So you see all over this country, especially in some of our southern states, you see now laws are on the books. In 7 states have laws where you can't say diversity, equity, and inclusion in a public job or at a university setting, right? You can't have the word. The websites are stripped of it. You can't hire for diversity. You can't admit for diversity, right? Because as Ben Carson in one of his more profoundly stupid moments said, oh, we're past this now. We're past that time when race was an issue. So we don't need affirmative action anymore. And you wonder, when did this great neurosurgeon lose his mind? You know, and start uttering this level of stupidity. You know, where are you living that you have not encountered these type of racial discriminations? Where are you at that you would think that this country is past this and that now we have an equitable system, so we don't need anything in place to force people to think about the diversity in hiring, in education, in all those things. So in order for us to get to that place where we prioritize groups of people, that American Indians, Alaskan Natives, African Americans, Hispanic people especially, we would have to contend with that, and nobody is doing that these days.
I'd just like to say a little something pertaining to what Hank just said. Now what they're doing with some of the clinics that's coming out into the community, like Cataldo and some other clinics that have been coming out for COVID, they're pre-registered. You have to have at least 25 people. They're saying, it's all politics, I believe. I think pretty much what we've been talking about. You know, you got to have at least 25 people before they want to come out and say that they want to get a vaccine. And that's because they're saying, well, before we sent out 230 people came out, so it was a waste, or that money was not well spent. Now they're looking at it now. They want to account for everything, every COVID vaccination that comes out now, prior to sending out the vaccinations. To my thinking, I would rather have 50 come out and 30 people come out, or 100 come out, you know what I mean? And that's up to them how they kind of, if it can be, as long as it's kept in the right condition, it should be safe. So that's something we should kind of advocate for and find out what's going on with that, because it's hurting the underserved and people of color, and it's hurting us quite a bit. So that is another connection, Hank. I mean, that's the other piece of it. So, and also they're saying, well, it's $130 for the vaccine. We're spending that, and we have to spend it through our company. Well, to me, it spares no significance to the people that's really getting hurt, the uninsured, you know, the black and brown people, mostly. So we really have to look at that and advocate for it as we move forward. So it is a big issue right now.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's one of the little undercurrents of the current vaccine setup, that before you had literally a retired Army general who was coordinating the entire vaccine response through the government. The government is not doing that anymore, right? So really what is happening is that the pharmacies are talking to the vaccine manufacturers, and they're getting vaccines shipped to them. So all of that state-by-state coordination, all of that is gone, right? And so the hope is that with the current rules in place, the insurance companies will follow through on that agreement, and that they will make vaccines available to every single person who wants to get a vaccine. And I would say to you, as I've always said, getting a vaccine or not getting a vaccine is a personal decision that you make. The same way you would make a decision with your physician whether or not to get chemotherapy if you find a tumor, whether or not you should get radiation, whether or not you should get surgery of any type. It's a personal decision, and you should not feel forced into making that decision. You should be thoughtful about making a decision about your health. What I'm telling you from where I stand is that I've looked at the vaccines. They're just as safe as the ones before, no matter what you're seeing online and what the conspiracy theories are right now. The vaccines are still safe. They're still effective, and I've given you the rationale as to why they have these updated versions of the vaccine. So you now can make a decision based on good information and not on conspiracy. And that has always been the goal from where I stand. I want you to be the one to make the decision, not somebody else making it for you. But you can't make a good decision if you don't have all the information, right? And information is power, you know? And when people start conflating things and trying to trick you into getting you not to get vaccinated, I always wonder, what is the agenda? What do they get from it? But I can't tell you how many times over the past few weeks I've gotten these WhatsApp videos, you know, from Dr. McCullough and all of these people. McCullough was a cardiologist before COVID, and all of a sudden COVID came, and now he's an immunologist, and he's an epidemiologist, and he knows everything about vaccines and mRNA vaccines that he never heard about before the pandemic started. He's an armchair pandemic expert, you know, who doesn't know what he's talking about. And as I've told you before in this setting, I'm not some newcomer to this. I've been doing vaccines for 30-something years. That's my life's work. You know, I've been an immunologist for 30-something years. That's what I do. So when you talk about the immune system, when you talk about response, and when you talk about a vaccine, this is not something theoretical for me. I'm picturing it all in my head. It's like a scroll just rolling through. I'm picturing every cell, every protein interaction, every phosphorylation. You know, I'm picturing every cell division. I'm picturing the genetics and how the DNA is working. I'm picturing the messenger RNA that's being copied off that. I'm picturing the transcription factors working and the cytokines going out, because that's my wheelhouse. That's what I do, you know? And the same way I'm not gonna have my plumber work on my car, no matter how much he loves cars, is the same way I'm not gonna listen to a cardiologist tell me about vaccines, because he was never trained in it. He did one class in medical school, exactly one, in immunology, and probably failed it too. But you know, do you know what you call a doctor who graduates at the, do you know what you call somebody in medical school who graduates at the bottom of their class? You call him a doctor, because he still graduated. But you don't know how he did. I always was at the top of my class, right? I was never below the top of my class. This is what I do. I've trained over 100 students in immunology. In fact, one of my students who I trained is responsible for the clinical trials at Moderna, right? That's where he's at, right? So I'm no novice in this area. And what I don't know, I have the context and the background to go look it up, right? I don't embody all the knowledge, but if somebody writes something that's foolish, I know it, because I know what doesn't match with the context of what I've learned over these past 30-something years and what's evolved, right? So I'm not here talking about something that I just went and did a Google search on. You know, I'm not here talking about something that I got some WhatsApp video on. I'm talking from decades of experience, of understanding, and of great studying and knowledge. This is what I got my PhD in. This is what I've trained hundreds of people on and taught thousands upon thousands of students in. So while he might have done one immunology course as part of a module, I have taught tons of immunology courses, from the most basic level to the most complex level. Not only that, I'm editor of journals that publish on immunology. In other words, I am at a position where I make a decision about what gets published and what doesn't in the field. So my colleagues look to me for guidance about whether or not something is viable to be put out there as a scientific peer-reviewed publication, right? I myself publish regularly in the area of immunology, right? You go look up my name and you look at publications, you'll see many of them there that I've published on vaccines, vaccine development, the immune system, respiratory diseases. You know, my lab, under my direction, was the first to discover that there are infectious microbes that can cause a type of asthma. Before I discovered that, nobody did. So now there are people with asthma who are being treated successfully based on the clinical trials that I've done through my lab, right? So again, I'm just telling you a little bit about me to say these are my credentials. So when I come and I tell you this from that platform. Moreover, I tell you it within the context of the fact that I'm a Christian first, right? I'm not going to misrepresent the facts because I answer to God ultimately, right? And people might come and say, oh, this person is being paid by this person. That makes no difference to me. I don't sell my soul to the devil. You know, I worship and trust in God. And that's my ultimate goal in life, that someday all of this will be over, right? Someday all of this pain and this arthritis and, you know, respiratory stuff that we have to deal with, wondering about what's coming next, all that is going to be done with. And one day, wherever you are, whether you're in the grave or you're alive, Paul says none of us will have to wait, right? Paul says those who are alive have no advantage over those who are dead because the dead in Christ will rise first, right? And we will all be caught up, defying gravity, caught up to meet him in the air. So someday your eyes are going to be drawn to some light coming from the sky. And as it gets closer, all you see is this brightness. But then the trumpet will sound. And you will know that this is different. And as it gets closer and closer, you will look and you will say, that is Jesus. That is Jesus. And you'll say, behold, the Son of God. I've long waited for him. And he's come to save us. And someday, Revelation tells us that we're going to sit with him at a great supper. And he's going to come to each of us with a white stone. Go and read it in Revelation. And on it, a name. Only you will know. And when the Bible tells us that when we see it, when we see the name that is on there, we will know that this is my true name. Maybe your family, your parents gave you some full name. Gave you some name that you never liked. Maybe you got married to some washed up guy who gave you a name that you don't like. Maybe somebody has been calling you a name that doesn't define you. Maybe you've been called drug addict, prostitute, good for nothing. And you probably over time have embodied that name and it has defined you. But when you see that name that Jesus will give to you, he's not holding up and showing it to everybody. He's coming, and Jesus with his nail-pierced hands is handing you a white stone. You know what a white stone meant back in the day, in the Old Testament times? When you went to court for a case, the jurors had white stones or black stones, and they would put them in a basket. If the white stone was put in the basket, it means the charges were gone. You are cleared. You're forgiven. So Jesus presenting you with a white stone is no mistake. He's saying your sins have been forgiven. Why? Because Jesus paid it all. And you will look at that name and you'll look at it and you say, yes, this is my name. This is who I am. I hope that in that moment I'll be able to look across and I'll see you, Bishop, looking at your name with a big smile on your face. And I'll look at you, and I'll see you look at your name. And as we see our names, heaven will be a beautiful place. And the Bible tells us that there'll be a tree of life bearing 12 manner of fruit for the year, right? And the leaves of it and the fruit of it will be for what? The healing of the nations. We will never be sick again. We'll never be sick again. And as an infectious disease expert, I'll be out of a job. And I won't be happier for it. I'll be happier for it. Amen. Amen. God bless you. God bless you.
Thank you, Dr. Webley. We're so blessed to have you here. And we'd like for folks to kind of share this, and hope they was watching it on Facebook and all the other, well, Facebook particularly, and with other sites they can watch it on. But share this with other church families and other churches, because we need Dr. Webley to go. I mean, we know what he does here at Solid Rock, and when he brings this information and knowledge to us. These other churches need to get some of this, a touch of this also. So I would love to put something together. We can get as many churches as we can together and put something on. So keep that in thought. Pastor, bishop, congregation, let's make some things happen. God bless you. God bless.